So it just gets more desperate and sleazy the further it goes on. In episode 6, Leah begins the thing by saying, "There's no life to be enjoyed when you are a Scientologist." End of quote. I mean, what a pronunciament, though. There's no life to be enjoyed. I mean, talk about projection. You know, she says, "You do the work now so that there is life for your children," end of quote, right? In the context of which she says it, it makes it sound like every Scientologist becomes a worker ant, and it's just this programmed to work. And then but of course, you put it in the context of what she said earlier. I mean, it was not but 2 episodes earlier she began with, "There is no mother-father relationship. You are trained not to have a single care or a concern about your offspring." Here she is 2 episodes later, because she's trying to create a different false impression. She says precisely the opposite, that you only work for the future of your children. Do you get what I'm saying? Everything is just this extreme, and so they'll just say these most outlandish things at the beginning to create the foundation to which to falsely position the quote-unquote narrative they're going to tell. In this case, she literally, this is the one where Leah allegedly encounters randomly this woman on the Clearwater Beach who's trying to score some dope, right? And Leah is going off about how, when I was a Scientologist, I was trained to think that I should do something for her. Like I have some responsibility. Like, what a crazy notion. So not only are you a victim and you're always going to be a victim, you also ain't responsible for anything. And if you have a thought that you might take responsibility for your neighbor, that's a sickness that's been implanted into you that you've been brainwashed into. That's where we're at too by episode 6. It's just gotten to the point where the pile-on is so frenzied that it's completely non sequitur, self-contradictory to the things that have been said earlier, and actually weird, destructive statements to the public at large. But at this point, it's just this flailing pile-on, and it doesn't matter, because they're just trying to create the immediate emotional sensation of the story they're going to tell right now. Again, they started off with, and by the way, this technique of Leah and Mike Rinder talking for the person they're displaying, it gets worse episode by episode to this one where she begins the segment by Leah saying, "The reason Scientologists don't want to speak out is because they have family members in the church, and it's a mortal sin." Mortal sin. They're using this, end of quote. So she's now created this new thing as Scientology. Mortal sin. There is no such thing as a mortal sin in Scientology, but she's created one. Okay? She's also created an excuse, I guess, in advance for Levin Smith as to why he, quote-unquote, didn't speak out. So, and by the way, you take her mortal sin thing, too. She uses these buzzwords in order to create this reaction that's anti to Scientology. But what she's actually, the substance of what she's actually saying, it applies to anybody. It applies to any religion. It wouldn't even apply to religion. It would apply to profession. If a family member is speaking out vehemently against that which you've decided to devote your life towards, whether it be profession, whether it be ideology, whether it be religion, at a certain point, you're going to say, "Down, boy." And if there's no joy, the ultimate thing you're going to do is discontinue relating with that person. Mortal sin. So they create this new term, mortal sin, to make Scientology seem different with something that Scientology never said. Okay. And so Aaron begins his segment off with a big lie. He says, I was in Scientology until 2 years ago. Outright lie. He's been out of Scientology since 2009. He's been in communication with myself and Mike Rinder since 2009, 8 years. Acting as a mole and a spy in a Scientology company because it was paying him very well, and he didn't want to come a cropper with those people. So he pretended like he was a Scientologist, so he continued to profit and get intelligence, which made him important with his idol, Mike Rinder. The next thing he says is absolutely false. He says, I'm the 16-year-old kid, or however old he was, and I'm going to this Scientology event. I see David Miscavige talking about what happened with the IRS and how it was this big, 30 years of persecution were overcome, and it was proven that Scientology entitled to exemption, and exemption was gotten, right? And he said, and I was watching it in awe, only to later find out it was all bullshit. Except the problem is, it wasn't all bullshit. Virtually everything that was said there, in fact, the entire thing was backed up by documents, okay? Virtually everything that was said there was true, okay? Like David Miscavige or not, like Scientology or not, what Aaron Levin Smith saw at that thing that he said were the false representations that then lured him in and made this whole thing fraudulent to him weren't false in the first place. They were true. So there's no story. If that's wrong, there's no story. And I'm telling you, it's wrong. So he wasn't lured in through false representations. And then in order to, I guess, try to validate that they were false, they throw this chyron up, all in caps. The church owed the IRS more than $1 billion in taxes. End of quote. Well, Mike Rinder knows that's a lie. But Mike Rinder is just a bag of delusion now, so he doesn't even register with him. It's a good line. The fact of the matter is we do know, is that Mike is laying these down, and I do know from firsthand knowledge that he does have knowledge that these are false premises. And we also know that he's been doing nothing other than for 8 years being paid to act as an authority to manufacture such negativity about Scientology. That's what he got paid for. That's what Levin Smith paid him for. That's what Mike Bennett paid him for. That's what Omblad paid him for. That's what Argel paid him for. That's what the Garcias paid him for, $175 an hour. And that's what Leah's paying him for. So, the emotional pleas, the false datums of Rinder and the emotional pleas by Leah get so thick that you lose sight of some of the import of some of the things that Levin Smith is saying. The whole thing's about how he was disconnected from his brother. Yet, if you listen to what he actually says, his brother disconnected from him. His brother got into the anti-Scientology environment and told Aaron and his mother, who were in Scientology, I don't want to ever hear from you guys again. He disconnected from them. But you would never know that, or you would never get that impression because of all the pile-on by Rinder and Remini. Again, for the second time in one episode, Leah is speaking to the mental state of somebody else who, if the story had any credibility, rightfully should have been there. In other words, the story is Levin Smith and his mother were victimized by their brother being declared after, incidentally, their brother disconnecting from them, right? the former member who disconnected from them, right? So this is how absurd it gets. So Aaron's going to explain away why he disconnected from his father, but didn't really disconnect, because that, of course, that would make him seem somehow less than virtuous. So he says, I sent the letter, but I never intended to disconnect. Wait a second, Aaron. That is impossible according to the narrative that Remini and Rinder have been busy piling on since before episode 1 in her cheesy book, in the 2020, or the ABC show, and the 7 episodes that preceded you. They've described an East German level of control where you must do these things, and there's no exceptions. But Aaron just, so that he can continue to be painted as one of the good guys, he belies that entire narrative. He says, oh yeah, you could just PR it and say I'm disconnecting and not disconnect. That's what I did with my dad. Which really comes down to the whole point I'm making, or I tried to make unsuccessfully in ASC circles, was as much as you want to paint it this way, as much as you guys want to adopt these convenient narratives, as much as you want to marginalize and identify and then marginalize people and create these black and white, no exception sort of pictures of the world, just like any other controversy with Scientology, it ain't that simple, okay? There's exceptions to every rule, okay? There's nuances in every situation. You're not invited to examine those. The last people on earth who are going to ferret those out are Rinder and Remini, because they don't want to. They want it to be this black and white world. And so when Levin Smith makes a bloop that, ain't that closely monitored, and if I don't wish to do something, I don't have to do it. It just goes right by you. And it just, because the pile-on is so heavy that, by this part in the series, you've just lost all cognitive sensibilities. It's all this insensible appeal to emotion. They're bad. Everything's black and white. There's no exceptions. And this is a creation. This is a creation of Remini and Rinder. They have created that through this series. And that's why I say, here we are on the second to the last episode, I think, and virtually none of these stories, absent that backdrop, absent that conditioning, absent that brainwashing, none of these rise to the level of being a story that anybody would have any interest in hearing.